Welcome back. On this channel, I talk a lot about Kriya Yoga, and there are a lot of different places where you can find the name Kriya. You can find it in Hatha Yoga, where they're talking about cleansing rituals for the body. And there are a number of organizations who have taken on this name, and there are quite a few books as well that have taken on this name. But specifically, I'm talking about the Kriya Yoga of Lahiri Mahasaya, specifically within the Panchanan Bhattacharya lineage, because they have managed to preserve it in its original format, which is remarkable. It's like a martial art. You're passing it from one generation to the next. And while that generation may put it in their own words, it's very important that the actual technique is preserved in its original form. So I wanted to talk about Kriya Yoga and give an introduction to it. So the place I thought we'd start is the Autobiography of a Yogi. This is how I first heard about Kriya Yoga and Lahiri Mahasaya. And so that's where I thought we'd start. The thing we have to know about the Autobiography of a Yogi is that Yogananda actually had quite a time getting that thing published and went from publisher to publisher to publisher, trying to find somebody who would just publish his book. And eventually he published it himself, but first he found an organization in New York to publish his book. And so what you have to know is that each time the book was rejected, the stories got a little more fantastical. So the core of the book is beautiful and true, and yet the stories just got a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger, and a little bit bigger in order to get the book published. Not only that, the book has gone through so many iterations. It's kind of amazing. I actually was collecting them. There are 8 original versions of the Autobiography of Yogi. It's gone through many more iterations since then, but the first 8 are something that I wanted to collect. I think I got about 5, and then I stopped because they get a little expensive. But eventually, I'll probably collect all 8. So it's just a few more that I have to collect. But anyway, I love the Autobiography. I really love it. It's a great introduction to a lot of the theories and understandings of yoga, and specifically of Kriya Yoga. And yet, we ought not to take the more fantastical stories too seriously. So let's start with Autobiography Yogi, and we're going to dive right into the chapter on Kriya Yoga. And I'll have a link for this in the description. The science of Kriya Yoga, mentioned so often in these pages, became widely known in modern India through the instrumentality of Lahiri Mahasaya. The Sanskrit root for Kriya is Kri, to do, to act, and react. The same root is found in the word karma. Now this is really important right there at the very beginning, because if you listen to Banmali Lahiri, he's the great-great-grandson of Lahiri Mahasaya. And he said that originally, Lahiri Mahasaya never expressed that his yoga was Kriya Yoga. He actually called it Sahaja, which means the natural, pure, original state. So what does that mean? It means when you silence all of the projections of the limbic brain as they go into the body, we call those chakras, right? When all of those are silenced, when those projections reverse back into the brain, and you are face to face with the spiritual I, the one reality, that is Sahaja. That is the natural state. So that's what Lahiri Mahasaya was talking about. But he would say to his students, be sure to do your kriyas, which means your actions, right? So he was telling them, go ahead, when you go home, don't forget to do your actions that I shared with you to do. And so in this way, his students picked up that, well, and this often happens in a martial art. The originator will say something in a certain way, and his students will grab onto it like a handle, and take it home. And that becomes the norm. So it's a very natural process, but it's very interesting that Lahiri Mahasaya never classified his yoga as Kriya Yoga. It was his students who did that. What Kriya Yoga is primarily is a pranayama technique. It has to do with the breath and the life force simultaneously. Because when you work with your breath, you work with the life force. And when you work with the life force, you work with your breath. So they are one and the same. So this term prana specifically is the energy coming up the spine. So you have apana going down and you have prana going up. So pranayama, yama means control of that energy. And that energy has to do primarily with your breath. Kriya Yoga and pranayama have to do with your breath. Another name for this process is prana karma. So we're doing work, which is karma. We're doing that work with the limbic brain. And so it's called prana karma. So that's why right here in the Autobiography of Yogi, the Sanskrit root of kriya is kri, to do, to act, and react. The same root is found in the word karma, the natural principle of cause and effect. Kriya Yoga is thus union, yoga, with the infinite through a certain action or rite. A yogi who faithfully follows its technique is gradually freed from karma or the universal chain of causation. And this is very interesting. You can explain this in psychological and neurolinguistic terms that when you silence these projections, you are no longer projecting out these negative things which are in the projections of the limbic brain, what we call chakras. So when you silence those, you're no longer projecting those things. And so when you're no longer projecting those things, you don't draw those negative things to you, because psychology tells us what we hold inside becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We somehow magnetically draw ourselves to the things that we hold inside of ourselves. So in Kriya, when we silence those things, we no longer attract those negative things. Very, very fascinating. Kriya Yoga is a simple psychophysiological method by which the human blood is decarbonated. So there's two things here. Psychophysiological, what a beautiful term. We're using the body to affect the brain and the brain to affect the body. So we have this reciprocal relationship between the body and the brain. Just amazing. What a beautiful word. Psychophysiological. Now, here we have something which is incorrect. The human blood is decarbonated. Well, if you want to decarbonate your blood, all you have to do is hyperventilate. You do enough hyperventilation and your blood will be completely oxygen rich, and then you'll pass out. So that's not a good thing. That's not a good thing to do. So Kriya Yoga is much more involved in that. This is why I talk so much about heart rate variability, okay? Heart rate variability, resonant breathing. And what we're doing is we are lowering the breath rate. We are prolonging how long we breathe. We're lengthening the breath. And so because we're lengthening the breath, we are reducing the breath. And that's a really big deal. We're actually, so the best way to think about carbon and oxygen is a marketplace. So what you really want to oxygenate is the entire body, not just your blood. When the oxygen shows up to the marketplace, okay, so here you've got your body and here you've got your blood. And so the blood shows up with all this oxygen. But if the body doesn't have carbon to exchange, no exchange takes place. So the blood has to buy the carbon, and the carbon has to sell, the body has to sell the carbon to the blood. You see, that's the marketplace between your body and your blood. You are designed to run from jungle cats. So think about that. This is how normal stress works in the body. It's really cool. So You're sitting there, you're carving your stick, you're basting your salmon that you caught in the river, and a wild jungle cat comes to eat you. And so all your adrenaline comes up, you're ready to go, you jump up and you run, and now your body is pumping carbon. All this carbonation is going on in the body because you're using up everything in the body. And so it's just becoming inundated with carbon. And at the same time, you're breathing like crazy. Your blood is full of oxygen. So now the blood comes to the marketplace of the body, and the body says, hey, I have all this carbon, and it dumps it into the blood, and the blood says, hey, take all of my oxygen. And now you have carbon oxygen exchange, right? Fast forward a few thousand years, you're at work, you're typing away in your cubicle, your boss comes up, and your adrenaline shoots up for whatever reason. Maybe he says something goes off, your boss comes up and your adrenaline shoots up, but you don't run anywhere. You just sit there, frozen, right? And maybe he's yelling at you, maybe he's telling you did something wrong, or this memo didn't get out on time, whatever it is, right? And so your adrenaline is up, your breath rate is increased, but you're not running. And so the body doesn't accumulate the carbon. And so now the blood is oxygen rich and it comes to exchange, and the marketplace says, the body says, there's no carbon to exchange. And so that blood just keeps passing through with all this oxygen, but there's no exchange in the marketplace. So just making your blood oxygen rich will not solve the problem at all. And this is why hyperventilation does not work long term. It's very important. If you're following a procedure which calls for hyperventilation, it's not going to help you long term. It may have short-term benefits, but long term, it could be detrimental. I really worry about it for people who do hyperventilation practices. So how does the yogi solve this problem? Does he get out and run? Well, a little exercise is very good. So yogis often go on very long walks. That's wonderful. But beyond that, what is the solution? And the solution is this, that you lower your breath rate, you lengthen your breaths, the time that you're taking to take one breath, you lengthen that. And when you do that, you introduce more carbon into your breath rate. So now your breath has oxygen and carbon. They're bringing it to the marketplace of the body, and they hand over the carbon, say, I'm going to kickstart this marketplace. We're going to kickstart it and get this thing rolling. So now the body has carbon because the blood brought it through the medium of the breath. The blood brought it into the marketplace. And now the body says, hey, I'm going to exchange this carbon back to you for oxygen. And now we have, so long as that cycle keeps going, now we have a marketplace that is working once again. So that's the best way I can describe to you how this whole breath thing works. That's the first part of it. There's more, but that's the first part. And so it's not just the blood. That's a mistake. The atoms of this extra oxygen are transmuted into life current to rejuvenate the brain and spinal centers. By stopping the accumulation of venous blood, the yogi is able to lessen or prevent the decay of tissues. The advanced yogi transmutes his cells into pure energy. And when you're meditating and when you get into heart rate variability, you'll begin to feel some of this. You're going to feel some reactions, some benefits from this oxygen carbon exchange in your body that's going on so well as you reduce the breath rate, like I teach on this channel. So when that really gets going, you're going to feel some beautiful benefits. And just those benefits, but beyond seeing the light or fantastical experience, just push all that to the side for a moment. Just these little benefits of introducing heart rate variability into the body and feeling what it does for you is really profound. And you can accentuate that by feeling into the body. What is going on in my body as I sit very still and introduce heart rate variability into the body? What is it doing for me? That creates meditative mellows, and that's what Lahiri Mahasaya wanted for us right away. And that's what that's what I want for you right away. So that's why I talk so much about heart rate variability. The Kriya Yoga, which I am giving to the world through you in this 19th century, Babaji told Lahiri Mahasaya, is revival of the same science which Krishna gave millenniums ago to Arjuna, and which was later known to Patanjali, Christ, St. John, St. Paul, and other disciples. So quite a claim there. Kriya Yoga is referred to by Krishna, India's greatest prophet, in a stanza in the Bhagavad Gita, offering the inhaling breath into the outgoing breath, and offering the outgoing breath into the inhaling breath. The yoga neutralizes both of these breaths. He thus releases the life force from the heart and brings it under his control. The interpretation is the yogi arrests decay in the body by an addition of life force and arrests the mutations of growth in the body, thus neutralizing decay and growth by quieting the heart. The yogi learns life control by quieting the heart. So how do we do that? How do we quiet the heart? Heart rate variability. That's how you begin to quiet the heart. One more part I want to read. Krishna also relates that it was he in a former incarnation who communicated this indestructible yoga to the ancient Illuminato Vivasat, who gave it to Manu. And that's what I wanted to share. Indestructible. This yoga is indestructible. If we lost it, we would somehow find it because it's part of the brain and the body. We're using the brain, the body, and the breath correctly to create profound change in the body and in the brain. So it's not really possible to lose this stuff. It would be a tragic loss, but it's not really possible. It is indestructible because it's part and parcel of who and what we are. So down below, I'm going to have a link for the Autobiography of Yogi. I'll have a link for just that chapter if that's all you want to read. I'm also going to have a link for the original text as it was before it went through so many editorial iterations. So that's the first book which we can look at to get an introduction of Kriya Yoga, and I love it. I love the Autobiography of Yogi. Now the second book is by the wonderful disciple of Sri Yukteswar, Sri Sailendra Bejoy Dasgupta. So the book is called Kriya Yoga, and I'm going to have a link below. And I think it's a really wonderful book. Dasgupta is a glorious character. I really love him. This wouldn't be the lineage that I would pick for myself. I would much rather the Panchanan Bhattacharya lineage. But I really enjoy who Dasgupta was. I really, really enjoy him. I love what he has to say in his Kriya Yoga. It's well worth reading to get a feel for Kriya Yoga through that lineage. And then beyond that, there's another book called Kriya Stories. And I'm going to have a link for that as well. And so this is Dasgupta Ji's disciple who was looking for answers around Kriya Yoga. You probably found out that Yogananda did change Kriya. So if you make it through Dasgupta's book, be sure to read his student's book. And maybe you should do it in reverse and read his student's book first and then read Dasgupta's book, just because the stories about Dasgupta are beautiful. If I had to model the perfect student-teacher relationship, it would be Dasgupta and his student the way that he teaches him. It's not pompous. It's not braggart. It's not posturing. It's just simply Dasgupta understanding Kriya Yoga, explaining it to his student, and then going into Samadhi every day. It's a beautiful relationship between the two of them. And the story that his student tells so beautifully is that people knew that Dasgupta was in this small circle of Kriya yogis. And so they would come to him asking for stories and asking for introduction to other yogis. And so he would tell them amazing, amazing stories, and they would get all excited. And then they'd run out the door and they'd go see some other Kriya teacher who was a big Baba. And that's what they were looking for. They were looking for a big Baba teacher. And his student, Dasgupta's student, was always amazed. He's thinking, don't you understand? You have such an amazing teacher of Kriya right in front of you, and you can't see it. Right in front of you, and you can't see it. And they would be running out the door looking for that big Baba. And I noticed this a lot with people who read the Autobiography of a Yogi, that it fills them with so many fantastical stories that they're always in search for these fantastical stories, and they miss the essence of what Kriya is. They miss it. They run past it, and it's so unfortunate. So I love that book for that reason. So you might want to let's reverse that. So first read his student's book, I would recommend, and then read Dasgupta's book, which is full of science and theories about Kriya Yoga. So if you make it through the Autobiography Yogi and Dasgupta's student's book, which was called Kriya Stories, and then you make it through Dasgupta's book called Kriya Yoga, if you make it through all three of those books, that's a fantastical introduction to Kriya Yoga. And the next one I would recommend would be Sanyal in the Abode of Truth. This is the grandson, and this is a look at Sanyal by his student, Ashok Chatterjee. And I mentioned this book before on the 3 books to Enlightenment. There's one key element in the very center of the book when Sanyal explains to his students that he has reached the pinnacle of Kriya Yoga, of all yoga. He's reached the pinnacle of it, and he describes it to them. It's a very amazing book. It's a wonderful look at Sanyal by his student. So if you make it that far, then you're ready for something really, really beautiful, which is Purana Purusha and Who is Shyamacharan. And both of these books were written again by Ashok Chatterjee, the student of Sanyal Lahiri. And he has a really, really philosophical and sharp mind, and he does a wonderful job. So Sanyal gave him access to all of Lahiri's diaries. And so those 2 books, Purana Purusha and Who is Shyamacharan, those 2 books, which I have links below, you can get them on Amazon, and you can get them. So the link that I have is to a bookstore in India, and I have ordered from them over and over again. They're always consistent. They have good customer service, so I recommend them. That's why they're in the link. But if you don't want to do that, then I also have a link on Amazon for the hardcover. But if you want the paperback, that link is below. But those 2 books, Purana Purusha and Who is Shyamacharan, those 2 books are just chock full of Kriya Yoga philosophy. And there's something very, very important in, and I forget which book, I think it's in Purana Purusha, there's something very, very important, which is how many Kriyas, how many Kriya breaths does Lahiri Mahasaya recommend to get you into pratyahara. There's an actual number in the book. I'll be doing a video on this, but there's an actual number. So I invite you to go look in that book and find those numbers, because if you're a Kriya yogi, you ought to know those books, and you ought to be thinking a little bit, what did Lahiri Mahasaya mean by these? And it was very important to him because he spent 9 days to certify his theories about Kriya Yoga. So his thoughts on Kriya Yoga, he spent 9 days meditating just to prove it to himself and his students. So that's really, really something. And so, if you're following Lahiri Mahasaya, if you're in this Kriya Yoga world, then you ought to know about those numbers, and you ought to be wondering, what did he mean by those? So really, really beautiful. But no other books are based on Lahiri Mahasaya's Diaries. So this is about as close as we can get to Lahiri Mahasaya without reading the actual diaries. And I would love it if we could someday. Maybe it will happen, but I don't know. So this might be as close as we ever get. Myself and a few of my students, we read this Purana Purusha over and over again. We just love it. It's so full of some deep truths. So like I said, I'm going to make another video on this, but very quickly, those numbers are 12 Kriyas to go into pratyahara, 144 Kriyas. So 12 times 12, 144 for self-realization, and then 12 times that, 1,728 for absorption, dhyana, and then 12 times that, 20,736 Kriyas for samadhi. And so what is he trying to explain to us? Is it do a lot of Kriyas? Not so much. It's that we want to do a lot of meditation over time. That's what we want. So everything that we gather in one meditation, we hope that we take those deep states into the next meditation. And so we're always leveling up a little bit, maybe not a lot, doesn't have to be a huge thing, just a little bit can make a big difference. And then all these things begin to come in line more and more. And our path in meditation becomes more and more clear. So those first 12 are very important because we are reversing the projections of the limbic brain so that we find ourselves in front of the truth, right? In front of what is real, that spiritual eye, that one reality. And doing that, we are in the face of self-realization. We have realized the porthole to our own brains. Haven't become absorbed in it yet. That takes more Kriyas, right? Haven't become one with it. That takes more Kriyas. But here we have a path to that self-realization, to that absorption, and to that union inside our brains. So I hope you guys love this. I hope it was very valuable. If it was, hit that bell down there so I can see you guys next time.